First of all, thanks it and Rohan for doing this. And I the topic that we have chosen, which is focusing on how people can build meaningful careers, is a very interesting one, and I think a very meaningful one for a lot of people. But before I jump into the questions, a quick introduction, and most of it I've gathered from LinkedIn. I'll give you an opportunity to add or modify if I got it wrong.
Sure.
But what I understand, you have been in the talent development and learning space for more than 20 years and worked in multiple geographies. Currently, you are heading the talent development function for a large IT firm. And in addition to that, you are also an author. I'll and a coach. I'll pause here. Anything that I got wrong or anything that you would like to add?
I think you've been very kind at the introduction. So, firstly, thank you for that. And thank you for the opportunity to be on this particular podcast. I think the one slight edit I would make to what you mentioned, while everything else was perfect, I'm an aspiring author. So, what I've written is ready, but it isn't published yet. And so that's just the one thing that I would, kind of edit a little bit. But other than that, spot on. Yeah, right there.
Perfect. You're almost there, and I'll be one of those first few to grab hold of that book once it gets out. Cool. I'll dive into the questions. As I said, the entire conversation focuses around meaningful careers. So
Right.
let me start with the first one. Uh, this whole idea of having meaningful careers and not just chasing behind titles and ranks, if you could explain a bit more, I see this shift, but if you could talk about it a bit more.
Sure. Now let's break this into two parts. First, let's look at it in terms of what are the changes that are happening externally, macroeconomics, etc. And then let's look at how do you look at this from an individual standpoint, right? Over the years, as industries have evolved, the world has evolved overall, how we consume, things has evolved. Be it how we earlier probably used to rent DVDs and today everything is streaming. How perhaps in the yesteryears you would actually go in and buy everything at a store, and that's pretty much coming to us at a click of a button within minutes, right? How all of that has evolved will keep evolving more and more, and technology will keep coming into our world a whole lot more, and that has impacted, how organizations are built, how individuals are building their careers, and hence, um, the idea that I wanted to talk a little bit about was to say that organizations will operate differently. Perhaps full-time jobs may not be the order of the day, and in a situation like that, individuals may also not want to be sort of tagged into one particular organization, 9 to 6, 5 or 6 days a week. And so, with the environment changing and with individuals and their expectations changing, how would we work around a point in time when you're not really limited by the things that you're doing and not there for the sake of it? I'll put a little bit of data on the table as well to look at. I had a good fortune of teaching at IMS Learning Resources about 22 years ago. People who were getting started with their careers, and I saw a lot of them pick anything that came their way, and eventually realizing perhaps that the decision could have been thought through much better, and that may not be their best choice. Today, I meet a lot of professionals, perhaps in their early 40s. Materially, they've got everything, and but there's still something within that is probably empty, right? And I'm also meeting a lot of senior professionals, perhaps in their late 50s, closer to what we would now call as retirement, and thinking, what next? Now,
Mhm.
each of these three cohorts probably have taken decisions in the past that are based on purely only what's available to them, not really thinking and going deeper to understand themselves. And hence, some of these decisions or some of these particular actions eventually come back to say, hey, maybe that's not something that's fulfilling, that's not something that's meaningful, and then that's causing stress, right? So some of the work that I'm doing is basically in this space to help individuals understand that the world's shifting in a particular direction. And unless you're driven from within, you're going to probably take decisions that are incorrect.
Sounds wonderful, and probably what you said resonated a lot with me as well. And two specific pieces that you spoke about, which is how things are evolving.
Hmm.
and all of us are living in the AI age. So I'll park that question, but just wanted to give you a heads up that that's one of the questions that people wanted me to ask you. The
Sure.
other one is where the whole idea of how somebody who is in B school today or probably graduating, how they
Mhm.
can start thinking. But before I jump into those aspects, you spoke about some of the decisions that may have taken earlier on, and now we feel that it's not as fulfilling as we would want it to be. So, what could be some factors that we should consider while making those decisions so that later on we are in careers which are more fulfilling, provide us more joy?
Absolutely. So let's break this down into perhaps parameters that usually people have taken to make those decisions in the past, right? Let's say, you actually look at people around you, you probably look at your generation ahead of you, you probably look at friends and cousins and siblings who are slightly older than you, and a lot of your decisions are based on what they would say, and accordingly you would, drive that
Yeah.
for your life. One. Two, perhaps a lot of decisions have been made in the past in terms of what's the most in thing at the moment. I know maybe 25, 30 years ago, it was becoming engineer, becoming a doctor, and, kind of then only will you probably be, running through a successful career. And if not, then perhaps not. That was something that was said, right? Also, one other thing was that, pick a certain job which is stable, get there, and perhaps retire out of that, right? So those sort of parameters with which people took decisions in terms of their careers. Interestingly, none of these parameters or factors have anything to do inside out with what mattered to you, what was meaningful, and what probably was looking at implement or applying your strengths, right? So, one thing I would say is if decisions have been made by parameters that I just explained, which are more outside in, the idea would be then to look at something inside out, understand yourself a whole lot better, look at what works for you, look at what really drives you, look at where you're, spending a lot of time stretching yourself still makes you feel fulfilled versus tired and stressed and burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
In simple terms, basically, look at more inside out ways. Don't look at something that's Puritan saying start here and end there, right? And probably look at more about what you would want, even if it is probably not readily available, which means that go with the tide or with what people are deciding. Think about it differently.
That's profound. And for someone who is already in the middle of, so they are, let's say in their early 30s, they are in the middle of their career, right?
Hmm.
They have started on a journey. They are already chasing those promotions and the next hike and those kind of things.
Yeah.
Do they still have an opportunity to course correct? And if so, then how?
Interesting. And I break this down into three for anybody at any point in time in their careers, whether it's at the beginning, whether it's mid, or it's towards like we call the encore, or second career, as you would call it. In each of these stages, there are, in my mind, just three steps to ensure that you're on the right track. And first step here at all the 3 points would answer your question that you just shared. So allow me to just elaborate a little bit on that. I think the first very important piece is for you to get clarity in terms of what you want or what you
Mhm.
don't want, right? So while you're in a job, or perhaps you're an entrepreneur or whatever that you would do at this point in time, it is to understand whether really is this something that you like and is driving you, or even for that matter, something that you don't like and is not driving you. So the clarity about either of the two, that's I think super important. If what you like is what you're doing at the moment, then of course you're perhaps in the right direction. If not, that's also a good sign to look at what are some of the things that you'd really love to do, right?
Mhm.
So clarity being step one. The second, as a result of which essentially is to then, if you're not where you want to be, then is there a plan for you to move towards where you want to? So once you have the clarity of, you're here, you don't want to be here, you probably want to be elsewhere. From here you are to where you want to be, what's the plan like to get there? And the third pretty important step is to be able to, have the guts. One of my found, when I started my career, the CEO, she would describe it beautifully. She would call it galls, right? Guts. And the other word, perhaps I don't want to use that here in a forum like that. So If you were to have goals, then you've got clarity, you've got a plan, and then you sort of, take that plunge. Now, if you are perhaps in your mid-career 30s, like 40s, and you feel that even if you stretch or you have the flexibility to do what you want, are you in the right place or not? Truth be told, most of us know yes or no, right? The only question is yes, then fantastic. No, then how do you get towards a yes? That's the next part.
If I can just dive a bit deeper into that guts portion of it, and something that I feel a lot of people may be thinking of right now is, uh, for people who are in middle class like us, guts may equate to liabilities and responsibilities. So how does someone, so if someone is already, let's say, in their 50s, they would have built a career, they would have made a fortune by then. But in 30s, you have a lot of responsibilities. Probably you have taken loans which you are still paying off. In this kind of an environment, how does someone get the kind of or build the guts that you are talking about?
Well said, Pravasi. And I'm gonna sort of cite two pieces here for us to work through this, but to navigate through this particular conversation. One is a beautiful book that's inspired me, and that will help us put things into perspective. And the other is a little bit about the book that I've written, and it's sort of about in the process of coming to life. Now, the book that I'm talking about that's been written is called The Five Types of Wealth by a gentleman called Sahil Bloom. And he says beautifully, when we usually talk about wealth, it is the finances, right? So you talk about the money that you've got. So that's a question you brought to the table. But if you read through this book and look at some of Sahil's work, he says the top four wealths actually have nothing to do with the finances, right? It's essentially about looking at, whether you have relationships. It is looking at whether, physically, mentally you are where you are, right? Socially overall. And then it essentially comes to the finances. And when he speaks about finances as well, he says that it's not necessarily about a number because at every point in time that number would shift. So you get there and the goalpost would shift. He says then finances are about having freedom. So at a point in time where you are, how is your life so that you're able to take decisions that you want, right? So the number is not necessarily about the commitment and perhaps that changes, but about how it's about a state of mind and having that freedom to choose, which essentially means you probably have a certain sum at the moment. You perhaps live in a certain way. How are both of those aligned, and how does that sort of go ahead versus hitting a certain number and the number changing over a period of time, right? So that's the one lens in terms of where you are. The other, and a little bit about the book that I'm writing. It's actually one in the series of three. And the beginning is about mid-career professionals, eventually, writing for early career and then encore as well. The idea is, we as an individual, at this point, generally, are tied to the role that you're in or title that you hold or, the job that you're in or the company that you're working with.
Yeah.
And the moment that's not there, right, there is no identity, no existence. And whether it is about retiring at a point in time and then not working, or perhaps at a point in time when there are different circumstances, macroeconomic or otherwise, where we don't perhaps have a job. The idea is for us to work on the identity of who we are and
Mhm.
building the book that I'm talking about that I'm writing is called Building a Portfolio Life, right? It essentially means at every point in time, are you necessarily working around multiple things, right? And how does that eventually become, for a want of a better word, multiple dimensions to you? And some of them are then multiple streams eventually of making an income. So if perhaps at every point in time one needs to be at a certain place to be able to generate a certain amount of money, then that's a sign that you're probably not going to get there to firstly having a number and getting to that particular number. So being able to run across multiple initiatives, call it projects, call it gigs, there are multiple names to it. Ensuring that you have all of those at a point in time is one way to be able to move there.
the terms that you used, interestingly, they all sort of relate to or resonate with how wealth is generated. So the portfolio of mutual funds that you have, you are talking about portfolios that you are building in terms of what all you are learning, and where, what all can be your sources of income for future. Um, the wealth piece that you spoke about, it's so interesting, and you spoke about how we get influenced into making decisions, right? So uh, elders said something, or there is an in thing these days and we are all chasing that. The other piece which is there, so you spoke about five sources of wealth or types of wealth. uh, for most of our life, specifically when we are young and we are graduating, everything around us is CTC, right? Everyone's talking about how much CTCs XYZ got. So I think there's a lot of focus on the monetary part of it and not on the other sides of it. But something that I got reminded when you were talking about it was probably 15 years back, I had read a research wherein one of the Ivy colleges had done research on their own students over 20 years to figure out people who choose careers for money versus people who choose right after college, choose a career which is closer to their heart, what happens to them after 20 years. And they found that people choosing careers closer to their heart are happier, but not only that, they are, in most cases, they have made more wealth monetarily as well compared to the other side of it. uh, a very difficult concept to understand and
Yeah.
probably inculcate when you are in your 20s, but I think in 40s we become wiser.
Yeah, yeah, I guess.
uh,
Pravasi, if I can add one more point to what you just said, and this may sound to some of our audiences as something that's simple, clearly not simple. So I'm not saying that it's very simple to do, but there are two factors. One is the environment that you're in. Essentially means that there are certain factors that are out of your control, right, in terms of moving in that direction. And then second is how clear and strong you are about about this yourself. And why I want to dissect them to make sense is the fact that let's imagine that you are perhaps in an environment where there are people who are pushing you against moving in that direction, right? Then how do you create an ecosystem whereby you have people who understand you, who give you the right advice, who are your sounding board, who are encouraging you, help you focusing on your strengths versus pulling you down to what you don't. That's important. So building an ecosystem like that of like-minded individuals. Second is, you ought to be very clear in your mind why you're doing this and how you're able to move ahead. So there will be probably a lot of circumstances when things would be difficult, and probably it may seem as if what you're doing is may or may not be right. At that point in time, having that conviction of why you want to do this is also equally important.
So true, so true. And something that we have been taught since very early age, right? Your the company that you build around you influences you in a lot of ways, and that's something which is
Yeah.
in your control. I had one question. So you spoke about being able to identify what you don't like and
Mm-hmm.
what you like and where you are investing a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
In all honesty, Rohan, I've come across a lot of people who are very clear with what they don't want from their jobs or careers, right? Nobody wants a toxic boss. Nobody wants jobs which are administrative, repetitive. They want to do creative things. But
Mm-hmm.
very few people are able to figure out what is it that actually that drives them, that they actually want in their career. So are there is there any technique, or are there, let's say, questions that people can ask themselves which will help them identify that?
Beautiful. I think I want to just give a slightly, to break the view that you shared here a little bit into multiple elements to make sense of it. I think all of us have certain preferences. We are wired in a certain way. And that's how ideally we want to live our life. Now, whether we are clear of the wiring or not is question number one. And then how are we navigating our lives according to that? I'll just take the point that you mentioned here and make sense of it. There are multiple, I love psychometric instruments. There are multiple psychometric instruments that I have worked over the years. But the one that I have worked the maximum, perhaps more than 2,000 one-on-ones basis, a tool called the TISC disc. And in that, just to take a perspective for those of us who probably don't know, there are four behaviors called dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance. Dominance speaks about being cutthroat, being result oriented, compromising everything else, but just to be able to get what you want. Influence is a whole lot of people orientation, and so wanting to speak a lot, connect a lot, be very very motivational, influential. Steadiness is about process. It's about listening. It's about being steady. It's about being consistent. And compliance essentially is about being perfect, deep rooted, looking at the why. So the D looks at the what, I looks at the who, S looks at the how, and the C looks at the why. Now, quickly bringing this to the question that you asked, some of us actually seek stability and predictability. And what we want then, if that brings it, then perhaps we are settled, and that's something what we'd love to do over a period of time. We're not really looking at being pushy, looking at growth, looking at being ambitious, so on and so forth. So I think and perhaps somebody who's more dominance oriented, D oriented, would perhaps just not like one day looking like the other one and want different things every single day. And then would want to push, would want to grow and ensure that they make a difference. Now, these two people are chalk and cheese, right? And what they would want to be very different from their life. So discovering who we are and then navigating your life according to that would be very, very useful. So some people would like that predictability, monotony, if some would call, but the others would probably resist that.
And just to extend that as a question, would you recommend that everyone goes ahead and gets a disc done so that they are able to identify what's their dominant style?
Great question. I think, I had the good fortune of getting exposed to psychometrics and a bunch of those tools, whether behavior based, whether personality based, whether emotions based, etc. Some of the tools help you, get language about understanding yourself. I would say that's a great place to start, right? In fact, some of the work that I intend to do, in times to come, book or otherwise, is to help people exactly do that. Now, think back at all of our work careers, right? At the no organization, or even go back before the organization, no school or college focuses on helping you understand yourself, right? No campus to corporate program essentially gets you done psychometric and reflect. In some cases, mid management, yes, but in most cases, senior management. And by then, perhaps people are solidified and think they are perhaps right as who they are. And very few of them at that point say, perhaps I could make some, change to who I am to be able to work through life. So to your question, one of the methods to do this, of course, would be to be able to maybe take a psychometric instrument, understand who you are. The other could be pure reflection. So just looking at patterns in terms of how you operate. I mean, even without an instrument, you could look at what are some of the things that drive you. Reflect on the behaviors that you exhibit a lot. Reflect on the values that drive you, and a little bit of that. And if you just have a conversation with somebody who is conversant in this space, they should be able to help you look at, two or three things that really are your strengths and two or three things that probably, don't drive you.
I think what you said is something that at least colleges and B schools and engineering colleges should definitely try and adopt. If they can guide the person in terms of where they may be, that can be a very useful instrument when they are building their careers. Um, Another question that comes to mind, and over here, I would, if you can share an example, that would be super helpful. So when I was talking about it, some people said, look, all this is great on LinkedIn. All this is something that you can start thinking of, as I said, once you have built your fortune and you are probably in your late 40s, early 50s, then your career is not career anymore. It becomes sort of an hobby, right? You are already there. But it's very difficult to do it when you have pressures, when you are competing for the next promotion. Given that you have interacted with so many people, any example that comes to mind, somebody in their 30s who was able to do it, and how did they go about doing this?
Yeah, actually, you'd be surprised, Pravasi. Your question is about 30s. I know somebody who's in his 20s and has managed to do that. So, without going into names and details, because it would be unfair on the individual, I was attending a 5-day leadership development program, which was spread across 5 weeks. So it would basically be, about 4 hours a day, very, very intense conversations, led by very experienced coaches, who ran that almost like a group coaching, program. And there were, I mean, I'm saying this now, being in my 40s, I was actually able to gain a whole lot of benefit from that as well. And here I had another colleague. When I say colleague, I mean I didn't know him before the program. It was an open program. And this gentleman was in his mid or late 20s. And, having been in a technology space, a techie, if you will, I was surprised to see him in the program, right?
Mhm.
But interestingly, what I saw is the clarity in the direction he wanted to move, and the lack of clarity in, or the lack of alignment in where he was at the moment. Now, somebody at that age regularly would say, "Hey, hold on, let me," I mean, according to what you said, right? Build a career, make the money, and then make that switch. But I think when he was very clear in his mind, he said, "I think I need to make a sort of career shift." So and he worked with pretty large tech organization. He made the attempt to, take a role which was leaning in that direction. Somehow, it did not materialize. He then actually went through a coach certification credentialing process himself. And within perhaps, a year and a half, 2 years span's time, he actually moved on, and he set up his own coaching practice. Now, this would be in some ways, probably borrowing from what I said earlier, the clarity of what one wants to do,
Mhm.
potentially plan in terms of how, and I think he clearly showed goals to take that shift. Yeah.
True. And when you're sharing that example, specifically an engineer who has moved out of that particular tech field and moving into coaching, I got reminded of Three Idiots, the movie, right?
Yeah.
I think everyone should watch it. It's so much about meaningful careers. And here's a guy who gets into the top tech college of India,
Yeah.
gets a job, and then decides, no, my heart is with photography, and chooses photography over that particular career
Yeah.
with a lot of social pressure. Even then, in your words, sticks to his goals and
Yeah.
does fairly well in the longer run. Very
Yeah.
interesting. Thank you for sharing that example. It
Sure.
inspires me.
Sure. And Pravasi, there's another underlying thing I wanted to bring through this example, right? Now, some of us could be leaders in different organizations and maybe leading teams and seeing people, right? I think this is a beautiful example of how one probably as a leader should not operate, right? If my team member comes back to me and says that I feel there's something different I want to do, or from an org process standpoint, if somebody wants to make that shift, I think we should enable them doing that because you don't necessarily, and this gentleman is now he's picked a niche of helping techies, to sort of get more clarity because he's been there, done that, equipped himself with the skills. Had the organization perhaps seen this and supported it, probably they would have had a fantastic resource who's be able to do something that not a lot of people will be able to do for their engineers.
You sort of touch upon my next question, which is, till now we have been looking at it from the individual's perspective, but
Mm.
as a leader, if I have a team of, let's say, whatever, five, seven, 10,
Mm.
how can I help them figure out what's their purpose and help them grow? Because I think that's the core responsibility of a leader, to help
Absolutely.
his or her team member grow. A lot of us end up focusing on the operational pieces, that, okay, these are the targets. Are we meeting it or not? We
Yeah.
miss out on a core responsibility of a leader to help groom the person into what they can become or they are best at. How
Yeah.
can a leader go about doing this?
Beautiful question, Pravasi. And let me, I think you will realize a lot of what I do is probably my experience and what I've seen around. But I'm also a huge fan of books, which probably are based on a ton of research. Now, for about a decade or so, I've been following the work of two professors, two Stanford professors. called Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. They, have set up uh, the school at Stanford. And what they did about 15 odd years ago is use the language or the methods of design thinking to life. And when you spoke about, going back to their students and figuring what they liked and, how they progressed through their careers, these gentlemen worked around that and figured that, not too many of them were really happy in where they were.
Mm,
And when this question was asked to people in the current, there's a beautiful video doing that, that they've released, which said, what do you want to do in your career? And the answer was without, clarity on what they want to do. So they used this course, one called Designing Your Life, and there's a book with the same name,
mm-hmm,
which basically talks about, how do you figure what is it that you'd really like to do? What's the problem that you want to crack? And how can you do that by reflecting, understanding, iterating, ideating, and then working around it? They've also written another book called Design Your Work Life, right? So both of these are in the form of programs. I had the good fortune to attend a two-day version of this program, in India, about a year or so ago, brought in by a gentleman called Navyug Monot, and he's a Stanford certified facilitator and a coach as well. Now, the beauty is, as a leader and as a manager, are we able to look at our team members as human beings, right? First, or people first before professionals? That would sort of tell us whether they're enjoying what they're doing, are their strengths being utilized, can their strength be used elsewhere, and can you create an environment for them to flourish?
mm-hmm.
I would say, though, even before looking at others, leaders would first need to understand themselves. Because a lot of times you see the world not how the world is, but how you are or how you see it, right? And I would hence say managers and leaders for them to first understand themselves well, and then pick the lens of understanding others and helping them discover. So a lot of times when a team member comes to you and says, I don't know, first and foremost, you tell them that's okay, right? 80% of the people who study something do not use that at the end in their work, right? They shift careers. Only 20% have been researched to sort of continue that. Now that means you're part of the majority in the world, so don't worry, right? We figure out what needs to be done and then build on it.
By the way, I'm part of that 80%. I did my post graduation in sciences. Clearly, I'm not doing anything close to that. A lot of times, my dad asks me, "So those 2 years were not worth it, right?" And I keep telling him they were, because a lot of things that I learned in those 2 years, I'm using it in a different domain, but I'm still using them.
Yeah. Can I use a very spiritual line here just for folks
Yeah,
to understand? I think you said you use it in different ways. I think whenever you're studying something, whether you use it or not eventually, if it allows you to understand yourself better, it's not about a subject you learn, it's not about finance, it's not about marketing, it's not about human resources. If it helps you understand yourself a lot better, I think then the job's done.
absolutely, absolutely, 100%. Now, the big elephant in the room, and something that we are hearing almost every day, and we spoke about evolution of life, right? Everyone's talking about AI, and it appears right now anywhere you read or listen to anyone, it seems that you need to learn AI if you want to be successful going forward,
Mm-hmm.
which uh, to me at times feels like it's contradictory to everything that we have been discussing till now, that okay, you should do what you
Mm-hmm.
want to do rather than coming under the social pressure of you should be doing this because it's the in
Right.
thing.
Right.
But the reality, again, if I can go back, is probably in another couple of years, and it may come sooner than that.
Mm-hmm.
AI may become the Microsoft Office of life.
Sure.
Anything and everything will require some knowledge of it. So
Absolutely.
how do we mix these two ideas that okay, there are certain skills that you will need to pick because they will become part of your life,
Yeah.
but still chase your purpose.
Yeah. Beautifully said. This actually reminds me of a time when we had the first desktop in our house. I remember there was an uncle in our apartment block, very tech savvy, and I'm saying this is, donkeys years ago. And he had picked his first desktop. And meanwhile, in our household, there was still a conversation of whether you need one, whether you want to buy one. You mentioned about middle class, and whether that's something to even spend on. I remember this uncle having a conversation with my dad and saying, "Look, tomorrow is going to be a world where um, using a computer is going to be like knowing just the basic language. And if your kids do not have the opportunity to do that, you are pulling them away from something that will sort of benefit them and make them their career more flourishing." And then the decision was made, and I remember the dial-up modem, those sounds, right, and connected to the internet back then. Now, coming back to this is our computer moment now, where AI as a technology has come in and is almost already omnipresent, will definitely be omnipresent in the next 2, 3 years, right?
Yeah.
So there is no use in fighting it, right? Now there are two angles to this conversation going ahead to make sense of. So there is no two ways that AI is here to stay. It's not a fad, but it's about now how do you work with it, right? There's a lot of work I'm doing today in terms of EI in the age of AI. So human beings are not going to go away. Technology remains. How do we work with it? So technology will not take your job away, but a human being who knows the technology will most probably take a job away if you don't. In our organization, we had called 3 internal AI experts about 3 weeks ago in an offsite for a conversation. And what one of them said has stayed with me and I think will stay with me for a while, where he simply explained, look, to a group of human resource professionals, he said, don't entangle in the thought of what is this technology, how do I learn, etc. But simply defining that if you're in a country where you don't know the language, or for that matter, when they don't know your language, and you need to get something done, you need to learn their language to communicate and get it done, right?
Mhm.
This is literally AI is understanding the machine's language to be able to communicate with it, to be able to get what you actually would want. Now, if you're actually able to do that, is essentially when you probably crack or mastered what needs to get done. If you don't know that, you're unable to communicate with the technology, and then technology will not be able to do what you want. So, something like prompt engineering, which is a very basic skill, you could probably be in marketing, you could be in the human resources, you could be in finance, or you could be in sales, right?
Yeah.
If you do not know the language of the machine, you will not be able to help it work for you. Now, to another quick added use cases here are either you use technology to be able to be productive, which essentially means get done more in the time that you have, which essentially means maybe you have a lot more time remaining because of
Mm.
what is done there. And the second is probably you use technology to innovate, essentially means do things that are probably more breakthrough first in class and so on and so forth. So either you are able to grow or you're able to at least sort of save, and that makes for a whole lot of improving your life, improving your work, and which is in fact not contrary but in the direction of what we spoke just a few minutes ago.
So essentially, AI can help me get to my purpose much faster,
Yeah,
and probably I can build beyond what I had initially thought my purpose is, rather than becoming a hindrance for me.
absolutely.
Perfect. I think I have exhausted all my questions, but before I let you go, I would
Yeah.
still ask anything that you would like to leave with
Yes.
or share with our audiences, specifically keeping in mind that these are people who are in the process of building a career.
Absolutely. I think Pravasi, I'm trying to put myself in the shoe of our audience who may have heard us over a period of time, but may end up with still a question, saying this seemed a little esoteric, or this seemed a little bit as not on the ground, or this seemed like I don't have a call to action to do at the end of this. Hence, to the people who think like that, I have something exactly for you to do, right? Now, I spoke of essentially figuring your purpose and everything else aligning to that, right? And most of us would say, now, where on earth will this enlightenment come through, and how do I actually then go in that direction, right? So there is a portal which essentially helps you figure what they call is your massively transformative purpose, right?
Mhm.
MTP. If you're able to, I mean, there are some questions, some reflections that you do that take you eventually to actually an articulated purpose, a massively transformative purpose for you. And that would be a great standpoint or start point for you to start building from there. For me, for example, the MTP that came about was to say, to help individuals understand themselves better across the exact three cohorts that I spoke about as we started, beginning of the career, mid-career, and on-core, to be able to, shape a purposeful and meaningful life. Now, if I'm able to do that, my purpose is very clear. And then how do I do that slowly but surely starts to align to that, right? So perhaps, as we wrap up, I'm going to give you the URL to that. It's not at the top of my mind at the moment, but I will, and that's something that probably could be, used to discover. Hold on, I'm just getting that. I'm looking for the URL. Sorry, but
No.
I'll probably share this across that can get done
Yeah.
to look up and then start from there.
No, absolutely. And from what you said, it seems that machines understand humans more than humans understand themselves. If a platform is able to tell us what our larger purpose is, but that's super wonderful. And yes, please do share the link. I'll include that in the video during the edits. Will be super helpful. I myself will go in and figure out what my purpose is.
Absolutely.
Will be a good
Absolutely.
activity for me. Perfect. Thanks a ton, Rohan, for doing this. This was super helpful, not just for our audiences, but a lot of enlightenment for me. So it was a wonderful conversation, and we are always thankful for that.
Yep. Pravasi, one additional piece, if you may want to add it somewhere, which makes it more lucid, I want to add one last point.
Hmm.
Um, we spoke about purpose. We didn't, speak so much about self-awareness. So I'm going to just quickly make one point here and you're going to use it wherever. A lot of times we focus on skills and building skills, oftentimes not focusing on the more fundamental, which is understanding yourself or your behavior, right? One way to look at it in today's day and age of technology and devices, essentially, is that knowing yourself is the operating system and the skill is an application. Now, every some point in time, if you have not upgraded your operating system, you could put in as many apps as you'd want, but you probably wouldn't get to where you'd actually want to be, right? So if you really need to sit back and keep updating your operating system more often, and then the apps can come in. If you just keep putting apps and the operating system is not updated, chances are it's not going to take you anywhere, right? So that's one last thought I want to share as we wrap this up.
That's an amazing analogy, Rohan, and it clearly shows that you have spent a lot of time in the technology world, being the talent development head of an IT firm. Now you're looking at humans and self-awareness from an operating system and apps
Yeah.
perspective. But wonderful analogy. We'll definitely weave this into the entire conversation.